The air was thick with salt and smoke. The sea to the east churned under a hot summer sun, while behind the mountains, shadows gathered like an omen. The pass at Thermopylae, the hot gates, was narrow, no more than a cart's width at its thinnest point, flanked by jagged cliffs on one side and the restless sea on the other. Here, 300 Spartan hoplites stood in silence. Bronze helmets glinted, crimson cloaks fluttered in the hot wind, and the long spears of Greece angled toward the horizon. Beyond the haze of dust, rising in the distance, the earth trembled under the march of an army so vast that the very ground seemed to groan beneath it. Xerxes, king of kings, ruler of Persia, was coming. And with him came an ocean of men, archers, cavalry, spearmen, war machines, and the feared Immortals, numbering close to 100,000. At their head, the Persian king had demanded surrender. He expected obedience. Instead, Leonidas, king of Sparta, gave him only words, "Molin Lob. Come and take them." The Spartans shifted their weight, shields pressed together, spears resting on shoulders. They knew they would not leave this pass alive. But they also knew this was not about survival. It was about legacy. The fate of Greece, perhaps of freedom itself, would be written here. To understand why 300 men would willingly march into certain death, you must first understand the storm that led to Thermopylae. The Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen. Stretching from the valleys of the Indus to the shores of the Aegean, from the mountains of Persia to the deserts of Egypt, it swallowed entire civilizations like waves crashing against rock. Cyrus the Great had built it, Darius the Great had expanded it, and now Xerxes, son of Darius, sought to avenge the one humiliation his empire had suffered, Marathon. 10 years earlier, in 490 BC, a Persian army had landed in Greece, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they were slaughtered on the plains of Marathon by a much smaller Athenian force. The defeat was a wound to Persian pride, and to the king of kings himself. Xerxes swore vengeance. He would not merely conquer Athens, he would crush all of Greece, burn its temples, enslave its people, and erase its very idea of independence. But Greece was no united nation. It was a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, bound by rivalries as old as their histories. To many Greeks, the enemy was not Persia but the city across the bay, the rival who competed for trade, power, and honor. So when Persia's threat loomed once more, Greece was divided. Some argued for submission. Others hesitated, preferring safety to resistance. Only a few, led by Athens and Sparta, chose defiance. It was agreed Greece would stand. But how do you resist an empire with only scattered militias and city levies? The answer: delay. If they could stall Persia long enough, Athens could rally its navy and the Greeks could choose the battlefield. And so, all eyes turned to one place, the narrow pass at Thermopylae. If any men were born for this task, it was the Spartans. Sparta was no ordinary city. It was a war machine. Every male Spartan was taken from his mother's arms at age 7 and cast into the agoge, a brutal system of training that forged boys into warriors. They learned to endure hunger, pain, and exhaustion. They were taught to fight as one, to hold the line no matter the odds, to prefer death to dishonor. Their world revolved around the phalanx, a wall of shields and spears that moved as a single body. Each man's shield protected not himself, but the warrior beside him. To falter was to endanger the line. To retreat was unthinkable. Return with your shield or on it, Spartan mothers told their sons. There was no third option. By 480 BC, Sparta's military reputation was unmatched. Even allies who despised them admitted, if any men could hold Thermopylae, it was the Spartans. The man chosen to lead them was King Leonidas, one of Sparta's 2 kings. Unlike most monarchs, he was not pampered by luxury. Leonidas had endured the agoge like every other Spartan boy. He had fought in wars, eaten the same black broth, marched barefoot across the same rocky soil. When news came that Xerxes was advancing with a colossal army, the Greek coalition called upon Sparta to send its full might. But fate intervened. It was the time of the Carnea, a sacred religious festival in Sparta during which no full military campaign could be undertaken. The Ephors, Sparta's ruling council, refused to send the army. Religion and law bound their hands. Yet Leonidas knew that someone had to stand at Thermopylae, or Greece would be lost before the real fight could even begin. So he took only his royal guard, 300 Spartans, handpicked for their courage, each a man with living sons to carry on his name. It was a mission not of conquest, but of sacrifice. They were joined by roughly 7,000 other Greeks, Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, and men from smaller city-states, forming a coalition. But it was the Spartans, with their crimson cloaks and unshakable discipline, who would lead. Before marching, Leonidas visited the Oracle of Delphi. The priestess, in her trance, gave a chilling prophecy, "O ye men who dwell in the streets of broad Lacedaemon, either your glorious town shall be sacked by the children of Perseus, or, in exchange, must all through the whole Laconian country mourn for the loss of a king of the house of Heracles. For not the strength of lions nor of bulls shall hold him, strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus. And I say he shall not be restrained until he utterly tears apart one of these." Leonidas interpreted this to mean either Sparta would be destroyed or a Spartan king must die. He chose the latter. The march north was somber but resolute. Along the way, the Spartans were met with disbelief. Only 300? Against tens of thousands? But Leonidas' men did not flinch. They laughed, they sang, they sharpened their spears. To the Spartans, death in battle was not an end but the fulfillment of their duty. When word reached Xerxes that a mere handful of Greeks dared stand against him, he was amused. His spies reported Spartans combing their long hair, oiling their bodies, preparing as if for a festival. Xerxes thought them mad. He did not yet understand that this was their ritual before death, that Spartans prepared for battle as they would for their own funerals. When Leonidas arrived at Thermopylae, he knew at once this was the ground where legend would be born. The pass was narrow, hemmed in by mountains and sea. At points, it was so constricted that only a few men could fight side by side. A massive army would count for nothing here. Numbers would be choked by geography. It was, in short, the perfect place to make a stand. The Spartans repaired an old wall across the pass, reinforcing it with stone and timber. Behind it, they set their phalanx. Shields overlapped, spears bristled forward, helmets gleamed in the sun. The Greeks waited, watching the dust rise in the distance. Soon, the earth itself began to shake. The horizon darkened with bodies, banners, and chariots. The Persian host stretched farther than the eye could see, an endless river of men, horses, and steel. The Greeks fell silent. Even the bravest among them swallowed hard, but the Spartans stood calm, their eyes unblinking. They had faced death every day of their lives. Now, they would meet it head on. As Xerxes' army made camp, he sent a herald forward. The man's voice echoed through the pass as he called Leonidas. "Lay down your arms, Greek. Surrender, and you will be spared." The Spartans looked to their king. Leonidas did not hesitate. "Molon Labe," he said, "come and take them." The herald returned, carrying the insult back to his king. Behind the Persian lines, Xerxes seethed. How dare a mere handful of rebels defy the King of Kings? How dare they stand in open defiance when all the world bent knee to Persia? The order was given. Tomorrow the hot gates will run red. Night fell over Thermopylae. Fires burned in the Persian camp, stretching like a sea of stars across the plain. The sound of drums and marching echoed through the darkness. In the Greek camp, the Spartans oiled their bodies, combed their long hair, and shared quiet words. Some sharpened their spears. Others lay back on the hard ground, staring up at the night sky as though it were their last glimpse of eternity. Leonidas walked among them, his presence steady, unshaken. He knew what awaited them. His men knew it too, and yet none faltered. As dawn approached, the horns of Persia blared. The earth quaked. The tide was coming. and Leonidas raised his spear. The next morning, the sun rose red over the narrow strip of earth at Thermopylae. The pass was a bottleneck, scarcely wide enough for a handful of men to fight abreast. To one side, sheer cliffs plunged into the Aegean Sea. To the other, jagged mountains rose like teeth, impossible to scale in any meaningful assault. The Greeks could not have chosen better ground. From the Persian camp came the thunder of war drum. Soldiers stretched across the horizon like an endless tide of iron and leather. Dust rose in choking clouds as tens of thousands formed ranks. Xerxes ordered his infantry forward. "Crush them! Show Greece the futility of resistance." The Spartans and their allies stood in silence. Bronze helmets glinted in the sunlight. Crimson cloaks draped over shoulders, spears angled like a forest of death. At Leonidas' signal, the shields came up in perfect unison. The phalanx wall locked into place. The first wave of Persian infantry charged, screaming battle cries that echoed off the cliffs. Arrows darkened the sky before the clash, an ominous rain of death. "Raise shields," Leonidas barked. The Greek hoplites overlapped their massive bronze shields, creating a shell against the arrow storm. Arrows clattered harmlessly off the wall of bronze. A few found gaps, but the formation held firm. Then came the collision. Persian spearmen and swordsmen slammed into the wall with brute force. But the Spartans were immovable. Shields absorbed the shock. Spears thrust forward in calculated rhythm. Stab, retract, stab again. Persians fell screaming, impaled or slashed. Their comrades stumbled over their bodies, only to meet the same fate. The hot gates became a slaughterhouse. For hours, the Persians threw themselves against the phalanx. It was like waves crashing against a cliff, fury without progress. The Spartans rotated positions with machine-like discipline. The front line would kill until exhaustion began to dull their arms, then retreat a step back as fresh warriors replaced them seamlessly. No gaps, no weakness. Leonidas moved among his men, not as a distant commander, but as a warrior king, spear in hand, blood streaking his bronze armor. His voice was steady, sharp. "Hold the line. Push. Remember your training." The Persians, by contrast, lacked unity. Their vast numbers became a hindrance in the narrow pass. Their officers shouted conflicting orders. Soldiers were crushed against the Greek shields by the sheer press of men behind them. The Spartans exploited every misstep, every hesitation. The ground grew slick with blood. The smell of iron and sweat mingled with the stench of death. Still, the Spartans fought as if possessed, each man a cog in an unstoppable machine. By midday, the Persian losses were staggering. Thousands lay dead, while the Spartans' casualties were minimal. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne, placed high enough to survey the battlefield, clenched his fists in fury. This was not how the script was supposed to go. He had come to Greece expecting submission, not defiance. He had brought the mightiest army the world had ever seen. Yet a few thousand Greeks, led by a mere 300 Spartans, were holding his empire at bay. Enraged, he unleashed his most feared unit, the Immortals. 10,000 elite warriors, clad in scale armor, faces hidden behind gleaming masks, advanced with silent precision. Their very name inspired dread. They were called Immortals because their ranks never appeared to diminish. Whenever one fell, another stepped forward to fill the line, giving the illusion of an unending force. Xerxes smirked, certain the Spartans' arrogance would now collapse. But Leonidas only smiled grimly beneath his helmet. "Come then," he muttered. "Show us what your Immortals are worth." The clash was even fiercer. The Immortals fought with heavier armor, longer spears, and deadly determination. Yet the terrain betrayed them. Their numbers meant nothing in the choke point of Thermopylae. Only a few could face the Spartans at once. The Greek phalanx held. Spears pierced through scale armor. Shields slammed into masked faces, breaking teeth and bones. The Immortals were forced to retreat, leaving heaps of their supposedly undying brothers strewn across the pass. For the first time in his reign, Xerxes witnessed his elite troops not only beaten, but humiliated. The day wore on. Leonidas' men fought with a savagery born not of desperation, but of discipline and purpose. They joked even in the midst of slaughter. One Spartan, seeing arrows blot out the sun, laughed, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." The line of Persians faltered again and again. Their morale cracked. They had been promised easy victory over a handful of rebels. Instead, they found themselves charging into certain death. Xerxes raged, ordering yet more waves forward. Still, the Greeks endured. By nightfall, the pass was littered with tens of thousands of Persian corpses. The Aegean surf lapped at shores red with blood. At dawn, Xerxes renewed the assault. Again and again, Persian troops surged into the hot gates. Again and again, they were butchered. The Greeks fought as though immortal themselves, rotating ranks, maintaining formation, never yielding. The Spartans led the way, their crimson cloaks now soaked dark with blood, their bronze armor battered but unbroken. On the second day, Xerxes grew desperate. He ordered his archers to fire ceaselessly, hoping sheer volume would crush the Greeks. The sky darkened as arrow storms blotted out the sun. The Spartans raised their shields, shrugged off the assault, and, when the Persians thought the Greeks must finally be weakened, Leonidas gave the order, "Advance." The phalanx surged forward, shields smashing into Persian ranks, spears stabbing with lethal precision. They drove the Persians back out of the pass, slaughtering them as they fled. It was not just a defense anymore, it was a counterattack. The Spartans were no longer simply holding Thermopylae, they were owning it. But even as the Greeks stood triumphant, fate conspired against them. In the Persian camp was a man named Ephialtes, a Greek outcast twisted by bitterness and greed. He knew a secret, a hidden mountain path through the hills above Thermopylae, a trail that bypassed the hot gates entirely. Desperate for reward, Ephialtes slithered into Xerxes' presence and revealed the route. The great king's rage gave way to cold, calculating satisfaction. At last, the Greeks would be undone, not by force, but by betrayal. That night, under the cover of darkness, a detachment of Persian troops began marching up the hidden path, guided by the traitor's hand. As dawn approached on the third day, Greek scouts rushed to Leonidas with urgent news. "My king," one of them panted, dust and sweat streaking his face. "The Persians, they've taken the mountain path. They will soon be behind us." Leonidas closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and looked over his men. He had known, deep in his heart, this day would come. The prophecy of the oracle at Delphi still rang in his ears: either Sparta shall fall, or a Spartan king must die. The time of sacrifice had arrived. Leonidas turned to his 300 and said the words that sealed their place in history: "Brothers, today we dine in Hades." The third day dawned with the heat of prophecy. The mist along the Malian Gulf burned away under the rising sun, revealing the Persian camp like a sea of bronze and scarlet. Drums thundered. Horses stamped the earth. The sound rolled through the pass like distant thunder, but the Spartans stood silent, their scarlet cloaks rippling in the morning breeze. They knew what this day meant. Scouts had returned in the night, breathless, terror in their eyes. The traitor Ephialtes had betrayed the mountain path. The Persians now had a way around the hot gates. Leonidas did not curse the name. He did not rage at betrayal. He only nodded, as though he had expected this from the moment he set out from Sparta. For the oracle had spoken long before: either Sparta must mourn the loss of a king, or all of Greece will fall. And Leonidas knew which fate he would choose. At first light, Leonidas gathered the council of Greek leaders. Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, men who had stood shoulder to shoulder for 2 long days in the choking dust of battle. His voice was calm, almost steady, though he knew the end had come. "Brothers," he said, "the enemy has outflanked us. Soon this pass will be closed, and we will be crushed on both sides. Return to your homes. Live to fight another day. Tell Greece what you have seen here, that free men stood against a tyrant and bled for every inch of ground. That is our gift to you. Take it back to your people. Some protested. Some wanted to stay. But most knew the truth. This was no longer a battle. It was an execution. And then came the Thespians. Their leader, Demophilus, stepped forward. "We will not leave," he declared. "If the Spartans stay, so do we. Better to die free at Thermopylae than live as slaves to Persia." 700 Thespians remained. The Thebans too were ordered to stay, though some claimed they stayed against their will. In the end, Leonidas had by his side perhaps 1,500 men, 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans. But he knew only one number mattered: 300, his Spartans. The king dismissed the rest, but when the Spartans prepared for battle, they did the same thing again. They combed their hair, they oiled their bodies, they polished their shields. Xerxes' scouts, watching from a distance, were baffled. Why would men facing certain death prepare as if for a festival? Because the Spartans did not march to their graves as cowards. They marched as warriors. The morning air quaked with the sound of Persian drums. Xerxes unleashed his army once more, but now it was different. The Persians came not in reckless waves, but in tight, disciplined ranks, surrounding the pass from front and rear. The Spartans met them with steel, shield locked against shield, spears thrusting in deadly rhythm. Once more the phalanx became a wall of bronze, immovable, unbreakable. The Persians fell in heaps, their cries echoing off the cliffs. The narrow pass still favored the Greeks, but now the enemy pressed from both sides, and every thrust of the spear cost more dearly. Leonidas fought at the front, as all Spartan kings were bound to do. His spear shattered against the chest of a Persian officer, and without pause he drew his Xephos, the short sword glinting in the sun. He moved like a man possessed, cutting, striking, thrusting, and then he fell. An arrow found its mark. The Spartan king crumpled, shield slipping from his grasp. His men roared in fury, surging forward with renewed wrath. They would not abandon him. They would not let the enemy claim his body. The ground became a charnel pit, Persians and Greeks piling high, blood slicking the rocks. At last, the Spartans dragged Leonidas' body back within their ranks, circling it with shields. With Leonidas dead, the Spartans knew there was no hope. Yet hope had never been the point. They tightened their ranks, pushing back into the narrowest part of the pass. Around them, the Persians poured in, arrows blotting out the sun, javelins clattering against their shields. When their spears broke, they fought with swords. When their swords shattered, they fought with daggers. When daggers failed, they fought with hands and teeth. Each man became a storm unto himself, dragging enemies down even as he bled. The Thespians stood with them, refusing retreat. Even the Thebans fought, though some would later claim they sought surrender. The ground shook beneath the sheer press of numbers. Xerxes watched from a gilded throne set upon the hillside, aghast at how long these few men held against his might. At last, the Spartans were driven back to the hillock at the center of the pass, Colonos Hill. Here, surrounded on all sides, they formed their final circle, shield upon shield, backs to one another, eyes blazing. And still they fought. The Persians closed in. Fire arrows rained down. The last of the Spartans raised their shields not to survive, but to face death upright, unbroken. Then came silence. When the dust cleared, the 300 were no more. The pass was his. The Spartans were dead. But Xerxes did not celebrate. His losses were staggering, his army humiliated. This was no triumph, it was a warning. Furious, he ordered Leonidas' body mutilated, his head severed and displayed on a spike, a barbaric act that even many Persians saw as shameful. But still, the deed was done. The king of Sparta was dead. Yet in death, Leonidas became immortal. Word spread across Greece like wildfire. The Spartans had fallen, yes, But their defiance lit a fire in the hearts of free men. Never again would Persians be seen as invincible. Within months, the Greeks rallied, defeating Xerxes' fleet at Salamis and crushing his army at Plataea. Thermopylae had not been a defeat. It was a message carved into history. On the very hill where the last Spartans died, an epitaph was later inscribed. Go tell the Spartans, strangers passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. For centuries, those words would echo, a testament to sacrifice, to duty, and to the unbreakable will of men who chose death over surrender. And so, though the bodies of the 300 rotted in the dust of Thermopylae, their story never did. It marched forward, immortal, etched into the soul of every people who ever dared to fight against overwhelming odds. If you enjoyed this dive into the unforgiving world of Thermopylae, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because next time we'll be stepping into another world of history that will blow your mind.